Yo guys, I've got a spark which I'm going to use to ignite the fire for another top 10 Thursday. Now, it's very important not to misunderstand the title of this here top 10 Thursday, otherwise you're going to completely misinterpret even the idea behind this list. Since we're counting down the top 10 most forgotten Skylanders, not the top 10 most forgettable, because with the top 10 most forgettable, it would imply that these Skylanders are in and of themselves forgettable and therefore not memorable and not very good, which couldn't be further from the truth, you could say, because a lot of the Skylanders on this list are actually very good. And in some cases, very memorable in terms of their design and standing out amongst the crowd. But they just so happen to have been forgotten by the community, or at least in my experiences, by the community as a whole. So it doesn't matter how good a Skylander is, if they have been forgotten and aren't really talked about amongst the community, then I therefore consider them forgotten and a part of this list, mind you, a worthy inclusion. So yes, that's the difference between a Skylander being forgettable due to them just not having a good design and not being a good Skylander, and having been forgotten even when in a lot of these cases these characters do not deserve to be forgotten because we have some really awesome characters on this list. Just wanted to put it out of the way, so if you guys see your favourite Skylander on this list, don't worry, it doesn't mean that I dislike them in any manner whatsoever. But with all of those disclaimers out of the way, I've also kind of looked into already what I'm basing this list on. I'm basing it on my own experiences from interacting with the community and how little these characters are really brought up in conversation because of it, mostly because a lot of people in the community, especially people new to the community, won't even remember who these characters are, won't be able to name them. If you were to ask someone to name every single Skylander, then these would probably be the last 10 you would think of, so to say. But with all of that lollygagging out of the way, we're going to roll straight into the top 10 countdown. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a character which even the developers themselves seem to have forgotten, because he is the only Skylander from the entirety of Spark's Adventure who never returned outside of that game. He never got a repos, he never got a variant later down the line, he never even got on Elite during the Superchargers lineup, despite the fact that every other forgotten Skylander at that point got one for that game. So yes, the fact that even the developers forgot about this character really doesn't help in the fact that he has kind of been forgotten from the community. But because of the fact that he does hold the record of being the only Spark's Adventure character that hasn't returned since then, is ultimately what gives him a very unique position within the community, because a lot of people rightfully love this character, and as such he is often brought up in conversation as the one and only character who hasn't returned from Spark's Adventure, mind you. So that record he set for himself, and the fact that the community do still talk about him at the very least, is ultimately what makes him far less forgotten than other Skylanders on this list, mind you. But still, it's very unfortunate that the developers forgot about him entirely and didn't allow him to return for future installments within the Skylanders franchise, despite the fact that all 31 of his peers from Spark's Adventure got that treatment, mind you. Sunburn, from my own experiences, however, isn't the most forgotten Skylander from the entirety of Spark's Adventure, because I feel like that title belongs to the dude, mostly because I never have seen anyone talking about him, not on live streams, not during videos, and because of that, this guy seems kind of swept under the rug, despite the fact that he had an Eon's Elite repos, because it feels as though after the Eon's Elite repos came out for this guy, nobody was talking about him anymore. He was no longer forgotten from the developers, and he just wasn't as memorable or as important to a franchise, especially for people on a personal scale, as the other Skylanders they brought back during the Superchargers era, such as Boomer, Ghost Roaster, and Dino Rang. So the very fact that he was swept under the rug and overshadowed by the more important, so to say, Eon's Elites is ultimately what makes this guy rather forgotten, again, based on my own experiences, mind you. For number 8, we have Walmart Bash. Slobber Trap. Slobber Tooth. That's for one, right? Slobber Tooth. So the fact that, I can't even remember this guy's name correctly really doesn't help in the argument that he's memorable within the community, because he's not. He's just overshadowed by better Skylanders of similar design, such as Bash, which came first. So naturally, this character felt very unoriginal from the get-go. And Skylanders that don't have an original flair to them are often left forgotten by both the developers and the fans of the games alike, and that's where this guy got his nickname Walmart Bash, and that's ultimately the most memorable thing about this character, the fact that he is a knockoff Bash at all point and has acquired himself that title of said Walmart Bash. So if it wasn't for that title alone, I reckon this guy would have been even more forgotten and truly left to dust on the shelves of several Skylanders collectors who forgot they even owned the character, or forgot that the character even existed altogether. So it's the Walmart Bash title alone that this Skylander possesses that makes him more memorable, you could say, at least in terms of the eyes of the community, than the other Skylanders on this list. But even then, that's not really saying much now, is it? Coming in at number 7 is our one and only gimmick character on the entirety of the list. Spoiler alert. Oh wait, the spoiler alert came after the actual spoiler, but as I digress, the problem with Thunderbolt is that, well, the only thing making him memorable in the first place is that he is a Trap Master. If he was just a regular old core from Trap Team, I can guarantee you he would have been one of the most forgotten Skylanders from the entirety of this franchise, without a shadow of a doubt, because this basic design you see before you was expanded upon and made much better with a much more recent, much more fan-favourite character known as Wildstorm, who was more fun to play as, who had a better design, a much cooler figurine, mind you. So because of that, we instantly swept this character under the rug in favour for the much superior version of this design, a design which took the basic ideas that was established with this figurine and expanded upon it. So Thunderbolt was just in that unfortunate position where he's similar to a much more memorable character, which makes him, in contrast, far more forgotten by the community. Whenever we're talking about Trap Masters, it seems as though Thunderbolt is never really mentioned upon, and he's always the last one named if you were to ask someone to name all 18 Trap Masters, mind you, purely because you would no doubt call him Wildstorm if the photo of him popped up, which is not his name. So naturally, the only reason why he's even number 7 on the list is because of the fact that he is a Trap Master, and gimmick characters tend to be more memorable than their core counterparts. But even that alone wasn't enough to save Thunderbolt from this list, mind you. Coming in at number 6, we have Trailblazer. Now, once again, when it comes to Trap Team, a lot of the cores were left forgotten because they came out at the same time the Trap Masters did, and the Trap Masters were so superior to the cores in every single way in that game. They gave the villains extended timers, they could access exclusive elemental gates, so naturally, nobody was going out of their way to collect the cores when you had the much superior Trap Masters at hand to collect instead. And Trailblazer, unfortunately, is one of those most forgotten from the core lineup of Trap Team, purely because there's no real interesting gimmick behind him to really make him truly stand out. He's just a bit of a generic pony type Skylander, which if you were to bring up a picture of him in front of some random some random gamer who hasn't played the Skylanders games in years would assume that this is a My Little Pony character rather than a Skylanders character, mind you. So the fact that this character meshes with a different franchise better than it does its own doesn't help with its memorability factor, and it also doesn't help that nobody's ever really talking about him to help gain recognition for this awesome design, mind you. Well, the awesome character in general, I should say. Coming in at number 5 is a very memorable character for me because Fright Rider was the main reason why I really got into the undead element, because in the Spyro's Adventure I didn't really like the undead all that much, not at first at least, but then Fright Rider came out in Giants and just made the undead a greater, more well-rounded element for me. But in terms of the eyes for the rest of the community, this character is terrible apparently, which is a title he absolutely does not deserve because he's a very underrated character, and because of that, he's never really discussed about within the community. I've never really seen anyone bring him up in my live streams. Nobody really mentions him along the other Giants cores, purely because he's just so forgotten in comparison to them. Again, by the developers, because he's the only core from Giants that didn't get a re-release later down the line within the franchise. So the developers forget about him as much as the fans clearly didn't help him out, and it's just such a shame that such an awesome, underrated Skylander has been so forgotten by the community due to the fact that the only time people tend to talk about him is in for words of hatred. So naturally, people who never picked up this character before and gave him a shot would have seen the bad backlash this character was getting and never gave him a first shot. So, you know, the fact that most people wouldn't even give this character a chance doesn't help them remember him all that well, to say the least. Coming in at number 4, we have Starstrike. Now I know what you're thinking, even if I can speak correctly, that is. Starstrike had a Lycor form of all things. How could she possibly be considered forgotten? Here's the problem. You can barely tell these two designs apart. If I was to show you one, you wouldn't be able to tell which one it was. And because of that, with the fact that these two designs blended together so well, it made Starstrike one of the most forgotten Lycor Skylanders. Just because if you were to place these two together, you'd assume that they have the exact same figurine because they just look too damn similar and mesh together. So for forgettability of the Lycor itself, and meaning that whenever you're listing all 16 Lycors, you tend to forget about Starstrike because of it, is ultimately what makes Starstrike a pretty forgotten Skylander. Not to mention, I've never really seen her talked about within the community, since the community doesn't seem to remember her existence either, especially her Lycor effect of all things. In fact, if anything, people remember the Lycor, but not the regular core itself, and again, wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two figurines because of just how similar they are. Coming in at number 3, we have Punk Shock. Now, Punk Shock had very many unfortunate things going her way. There were other superior female swap force cores even, which far outshadowed her, naturally leading the community to forget her instantly as they were too busy playing with the better characters such as Smolder Dash and Roller Brawl. And second of all, this character was released quite late into the swap force lineup, so naturally not many people got her because her figurine was produced much less than the rest. And third of all, she was given Easter packaging. She was never given any other packaging than the Easter iterations, meaning that, you know, because her packaging didn't really blend well with the other Skylanders, nobody really recognized her as part of them and never really saw her in uniform with the rest of them, and as such, once again, never really picked her up. So all of these factors coming in to really hurt the memorability of Punk Shock has made it so that now people don't really talk about her, especially in comment sections of all things. Whenever I mention her in live streams as one of the best female swap force cores, people are like, oh yeah, that character exists. Which to me kind of implies the fact that once again she's fairly forgotten, and people could, you know, if you were to name all of the female swap force cores, once again name her as one of the last of all of them, which is very unfortunate because she's such a good character. Echo here is kind of a combination of both the factors that affected Trailblazer and Punk Shock, because she's a Trap Team core which came out towards the very end of the game's launch, so naturally not many of her figurine was even produced and not many people really picked up this character. And you could even say it has the same she has the same problems even as Thunderbolt, with her design being very similar to that of Zap. And Zap is a more memorable Skylander, first of all because of his rich history between Riley, who unfortunately died before Giants came out, so the developers of course honoured him by naming Zap's WoW Power after him, so that factor alone is what makes Zap so memorable, and that of course overshadows Echo and makes you forget she even exists because her design isn't as original as Zap's, and it kind of blends in with his character, you could say. People who aren't huge on a franchise and just casually follow it through might even confuse the two characters because of their similarities, mind you. So the fact that Echo just has so many negative things going her way in the vein of memorability is what gives her the number 2 spot, and it's so unfortunate too because she's very powerful in game, she's really fun, she's got a real sense of music and atmosphere to her, and her figurine is so well detailed. So hopefully all of you can look at Echo in a much different way now that I've brought this video to bring her to light, so to say. Coming in at number 1 is a combination of all the factors we've been talking about previously. He is a core from Skylanders trap team, so he's automatically overshadowed by all of the other trap masters that were far superior to him just because of the stupid way how they, made the trap masters incredibly broken inside of that game. But second of all, he was also released very late towards the lineup, so naturally he was produced much less and people picked him up much less because they had less interest within the game, you could say. He has a name which isn't all that memorable and people get it mixed up all the time, leading to further confusion amongst the community for very few times he's ever talked about. And finally, he is a knockoff of a far superior design when it comes to the idea behind it all, and that character is going to be none other than Fling Kong, that's my point, exaggerated right there. He's a monkey with a name Kong. Donkey Kong? King Kong? Anyone? And on top of that, he also has a magic flying carpet of the air element. Why would an air elemental Skylander have a magic flying carpet, despite the fact that magic is in the name? Well, it just makes him a very forgettable air Skylander because he doesn't suit his element as well as he should. And his name is very forgettable, as I said before, because his last name is Kong rather than King, which just seems more natural to me. And there's also the problem that he is in direct reference to Aladdin. When you think of Skylanders, you don't really think of Aladdin, so naturally this character isn't the first character on your mind, so that leaves him incredibly overshadowed by several other characters within the Skylanders franchise, and it means that most people, when it comes to talking about this character, won't have a flying clue who you're talking about because they have straight up forgotten him, and it is a shame because this character is so much fun to play as with a really original, really overpowered moveset within Trap Team. He does have some very terrible movement though due to the carpet and the animations that persists with that. So it's a shame that the developers of the game kind of went outside of their comfort zone to create a very different design Skylander, but because it's so different and so unique, it doesn't blend in well with the other Skylanders, and you don't really think of it, or you don't really think of him, to be more specific, when you think of Skylanders because of it, and that's what leaves Fling Kong as the most forgotten Skylander of the entire franchise, at least in terms of my own experiences, and I can't emphasize that enough. This list is based off of my own experiences from my own streams, from my own interactions with other people's streams. So let this top 10 be a lesson for all of you, a lesson in which even the most forgotten Skylanders can be incredibly awesome, so they deserve a second chance for you to go back and check them out so you can truly appreciate what they brought to the table when it came to creating variety within the Skylanders franchise, both in terms of the design of these characters, their personality, and most importantly, their gameplay, because Fling Kong here, he has some really unique gameplay that's absolutely worth checking out. But with that being all said and done, this list is indeed coming to an end. I want to thank you guys so much for watching. I want to emphasize the fact that this list was not made to create negativity towards these characters. A lot of them I really, really like, so let that be clear. But with this all being said and done, at long last, I'll be seeing you next Thursday for another top 10. But until that moment arises, peace. And thank you so much as always for watching.